Hello. I should have known something was wrong when Laura didn't want me in the delivery room. She claimed it was stress, that she wanted privacy, but I didn't buy it. The moment our daughter, Lily, was born, I sensed it. An invisible wedge between us that hadn't been there before. Her skin was darker than ours, and the truth was staring me right in the face, yet I couldn't let it sink in. We were both white, after all. I kept telling myself there had to be some medical explanation, some quirk of genetics, but I knew better. Deep down, I knew something in my life was about to unravel. The first few weeks after Lily's birth were suffocating. Laura withdrew into herself, constantly avoiding me. I chalked it up to postpartum depression at first. After all, it was a difficult year. The pandemic, her job loss, and my long work hours had already taken a toll. But this was different. There was something unspoken between us, something she was desperately hiding. I couldn't take it anymore. One night, when the silence in our home was almost suffocating, I confronted her. "Laura, what's going on with you?" I asked, my voice low but firm. "This isn't just postpartum. We need to talk about Lily." She froze, refusing to meet my eyes. For a long moment, she sat there, her face a mask of tension. Finally, she broke. "It was a mistake, Jason. A one-time thing. Last year," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me, as if the world had tilted off its axis. "Who?" was all I could ask. "Marcus," she replied, and my blood ran cold at the name. Marcus, someone I vaguely knew from her work, before everything went downhill. They'd met through some marketing project, and I had seen them together once or twice at social gatherings. But I never suspected, never imagined this. I clenched my fists, barely controlling the fury that surged through me. "And Lily, she's his?" Laura nodded, her tears streaming silently down her cheeks. I stood, feeling the walls of our life collapsing around me. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice hard as stone. Laura didn't try to stop me. There was nothing left to say. But that night, as I lay awake in the guest room, my mind wouldn't stop racing. It wasn't just the affair that haunted me. It was the way she had been acting since Marcus had come into our lives. I knew there was more she wasn't telling me. The sense of looming danger gnawed at me, and I realized that this wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about something much darker. The days after the confession felt like I was living in a fog. The divorce proceedings started, but Laura and I were still stuck under the same roof, playing the role of co-parents to our sons, Max and Ethan, while the reality of Lily's paternity loomed over us. Every time I saw her, every time I saw that child, I felt the sting of betrayal fresh all over again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just an affair. Laura's fear wasn't just about losing our marriage. It was something deeper, more sinister. I noticed how she flinched at sudden noises, how her eyes darted to the windows, checking if anyone was watching. It was like she was being hunted. I needed answers. One evening, while Laura was out with the kids, I decided to search through her things. It felt wrong, invading her privacy like this, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. In her desk drawer, behind old bills and papers, I found it. A small black notebook, frayed at the edges. I flipped it open, my heart pounding, and what I read confirmed my worst fears. The journal started innocently enough, detailing Laura's stress at work and her struggles during the pandemic. But as the entries went on, they became darker. She wrote about Marcus, how their affair had started with a few innocent messages, how he made her feel seen when everything in her life was falling apart. Then the tone shifted. The entries after that were full of regret, fear, and desperation. Laura described how Marcus had become possessive, controlling. He started showing up unannounced, sending her threatening texts when she didn't respond to him immediately. He wanted more than just the affair, more than just her. He wanted to take Lily. I slammed the notebook shut, my pulse racing. Marcus wasn't just some fling. He was dangerous, and Laura had kept this from me. Worse, I knew now that he wasn't going to stop. He believed Lily was his, and he was coming for her. As I sat there, trying to process everything, I heard a noise at the back of the house. A faint knock on the door. My stomach twisted in knots. I stood, creeping toward the door, dread building in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe Laura coming home early. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just the night, still and quiet, and a single note left on the doorstep. My hands shook as I picked it up, reading the scrawled message. She's mine. You can't hide her from me. My blood ran cold. He was here. Marcus had been watching us. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about survival. When Laura came home later that night, I showed her the note. Her face went pale, her eyes wide with terror. He's not going to stop, Jason, she whispered, her voice shaking. He wants Lily. He'll do whatever it takes to get her. I stared at her, the weight of it all crashing down. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice tight with anger and fear. I thought I could handle it, she replied, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't want to drag you into this. I thought if I just kept my distance, he'd go away. Well, he hasn't, I snapped. And now we're all in danger. Laura nodded, her fear palpable. What do we do? We leave, I said, the decision made. We get the kids, and we get out of here. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Marcus wasn't just after Laura. He wanted Lily, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he believed was his. Packing the essentials was a blur. Laura was trembling as she bundled Lily in a blanket, while I rushed to grab a few clothes for Max and Ethan. Every second felt like an eternity, the fear of Marcus showing up at our doorstep tightening its grip on me. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting his shadow to appear at any moment. The kids were still groggy when we bundled them into the car. Max, our 4-year-old, rubbed his eyes and asked, "Where are we going, Daddy?" Ethan, only 2, was too young to notice the panic swirling around us. "Just a little trip, buddy," I muttered, forcing a smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes. But he didn't need to know the truth. Not yet. As we pulled out of the driveway, I could see Laura clutching her phone, her knuckles white. She hadn't stopped shaking since I showed her the note. I couldn't help but wonder just how deep she'd gotten herself into this nightmare with Marcus. "Did you tell anyone where we're going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She shook her head. "No one. Not even my parents." That gave me some comfort, but not much. We had a plan, or at least, I had one. My brother, Matt, lived about 40 minutes outside the city, in a quiet neighborhood where no one would think to look for us. Matt didn't know the full story, just that Laura and I were separating. He was the kind of guy who'd open his door without asking too many questions, which was exactly what we needed right now. The drive felt endless. Every set of headlights behind us made my heart race. Every turn in the road felt like a potential ambush. I kept glancing at Laura, wondering what was going through her mind. There were still things she wasn't telling me, things she couldn't. After what felt like hours, we finally pulled into Matt's driveway. His house sat at the end of a long, dimly lit street, far enough away from the city that I hoped Marcus wouldn't track us down easily. I killed the engine, my fingers still gripping the steering wheel. "Let's get inside," I muttered, already unbuckling the kids. Matt was at the door before we even made it to the porch, a look of concern on his face. "Jason, what's going on?" I glanced at Laura, then back at Matt. "We need to stay here for a bit. I'll explain everything, but not now." Matt didn't argue. He just nodded and stepped aside, ushering us into the house. It was a small place, but it felt safe, at least for the moment. Once the kids were settled, I sat down with Matt in the kitchen, the weight of the last few hours finally crashing down on me. Laura stayed upstairs, rocking Lily to sleep, trying to keep herself together. "Okay, man, you've got to tell me what's happening," Matt said, his voice quiet but firm. "This isn't just about the divorce, is it?" I shook my head. "No, it's worse." Over the next 10 minutes, I told him everything. The affair, the threats, Marcus stalking us, trying to take Lily, the note he left at the house. Matt sat there, absorbing it all, his expression growing darker with each word. "Jesus, Jason, how did it get this bad?" "I don't know," I admitted, rubbing my temples. But we have to figure out how to make it stop. Matt leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. You need to call the police. I did, I said. But Marcus is smart. He's careful. There's no evidence linking him to any of this, at least nothing solid. So what's your plan? I don't know, I admitted. Stay low. Keep the kids safe. I was hoping staying here would buy us some time. Matt nodded, but before he could respond, Laura came down the stairs, her face pale. Jason, she whispered, her voice trembling. My phone. Marcus just texted me. My blood ran cold. What? What did he say? She held up the phone, her hands shaking. The message was simple, chilling in its brevity. You can run, but I'll always find her. Panic shot through me. I took the phone from her and read the message again, my mind racing. How did he know? We hadn't told anyone where we were going. No one should have known we were here. How could he know we're here? I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. We didn't tell anyone. Laura was shaking her head, her eyes wide. I don't know, Jason. I don't know. Matt stood up abruptly. Hold on. Maybe we're overreacting. It's probably just a bluff. He's trying to scare you. He couldn't possibly know you're here. But I wasn't so sure. Marcus had been one step ahead of us from the start, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Somehow, he was tracking us. We need to leave, I said, my voice tight. We're not safe here. Matt grabbed my arm, his grip firm. Jason, wait. You can't keep running. He'll just keep coming. You need to face this. I wrenched my arm free. You don't get it, Matt. This guy isn't going to stop. He wants Lily, and he'll do anything to get her. I'm just saying we need a better plan than constantly running. Before he could finish, a loud crash came from the living room. My heart jumped into my throat as we all spun around toward the sound. Someone had smashed the front window. For a second, we all stood frozen, the sound of glass shattering still ringing in my ears. Then I grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the back door. Get the kids now. Matt ran to the living room, looking out through the shattered window, but the darkness outside revealed nothing. Jason, wait. We don't know who it is. I don't care. I shouted. We're leaving. Laura rushed upstairs to grab the kids, and Matt followed me, panic in his eyes. Jason, man, you need to calm down. But I couldn't. All I could think about was Marcus. He had found us, and now he was here, ready to take what he believed was his. Get the car ready, I ordered, my voice tight with fear. We're not staying to find out what he wants. But as I reached the back door, my heart stopped cold. The door was already open. The back door swung open as if it had been left that way deliberately, beckoning me into the night. Cold air rushed in, but it wasn't the wind that chilled me. It was the knowledge that Marcus was here, closer than ever, lurking in the shadows. Jason? Matt's voice cracked through my fear, but it did little to ground me. Who left the door open? I didn't answer. My eyes scanned the darkened backyard, every nerve on edge, waiting for Marcus to reveal himself. I could feel him, feel the malicious intent in the air. Laura hurried down the stairs, Max and Ethan bundled in her arms. But there was no time for hesitation now. This wasn't a game anymore. He's here, I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. We need to go. Now. But just as I moved to grab Laura, a shadow appeared at the edge of the porch. I stopped cold. Marcus. He stepped out of the darkness slowly, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. His tall figure was cloaked in a dark hoodie, but I could see the glint in his eyes, the cruel satisfaction of having hunted us down. Jason, he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. You didn't think you could really run, did you? I clenched my fists, moving in front of Laura and the kids, my heart racing. You need to leave. Now. Marcus smiled, taking another slow step forward. I don't think so. You've dragged this out long enough. Lily's mine, and I'm here to take what's rightfully mine. Laura gasped, her grip tightening on the boys, but I refused to back down. I wasn't going to let this man rip apart what little family I had left. I'll call the police, I warned, my voice shaking but strong. They'll be here in minutes. I'm sure they will, Marcus replied, completely unfazed. But you see, Jason, this isn't just about Lily anymore. This is about you and me. You've been trying to take something that belongs to me, and I don't like it when people don't play by the rules. I took a step toward him, feeling the anger rise up inside me, boiling over. She's not yours, Marcus. She's my daughter, and I'm not letting you anywhere near her. The smile disappeared from Marcus's face, replaced by something darker, something more dangerous. You're wrong. She's mine, Jason. And deep down, Laura knows it too. Don't you, Laura? Laura flinched, tears welling up in her eyes as she held the kids even closer. I could see the guilt eating away at her, the weight of her decisions crushing her. But I didn't have time for that now. I needed to get us out of here. Just as I turned to grab Laura and head for the car, Marcus lunged. He was faster than I expected, his hands reaching for me before I could react. I barely had time to move before he slammed into me, knocking me backward into the doorframe. Pain shot through my back, but I didn't let it slow me down. I pushed him off, throwing a wild punch that connected with his jaw. Marcus stumbled, wiping the blood from his lip with a sneer. Is that all you've got? He spat, the crazed look in his eyes growing more intense. He lunged again, but this time, I was ready. I grabbed the lamp from the side table and swung it hard, catching him on the side of the head. He staggered, but he didn't fall. His persistence terrified me. It was like he couldn't feel pain, like his obsession with Laura and Lily had made him unstoppable. Get the kids out of here. I shouted to Laura. Go. Now. Laura hesitated for a second, but then bolted for the front door, dragging the boys behind her. Matt followed, his face pale, not knowing what to do but sensing the danger. But Marcus wasn't finished. He roared with rage and threw himself at me again, knocking us both to the ground. His hands went for my throat, tightening like a vice. I struggled beneath him, the air being squeezed from my lungs as I clawed at his arms, but his strength was terrifying. You think you can keep her from me? He growled, his voice low and menacing. You're nothing, Jason. Nothing. I kicked hard, managing to throw him off balance for just a moment. Gasping for air, I rolled out from under him and scrambled to my feet. But before I could make a move, Marcus was on me again, this time reaching for something in his jacket. A glint of metal caught my eye. He had a knife. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, my heart pounding in my ears. But there was nowhere to go. He had me cornered. I could hear Laura shouting from outside, trying to get the kids into the car, but the sound felt distant, like it was coming from another world. Marcus advanced slowly, the knife gleaming in the dim light. It didn't have to be like this, he said, his voice almost regretful, but you forced my hand. Before I could react, Matt burst back into the room, a bat in his hands. With a yell, he swung it at Marcus, catching him in the ribs. Marcus crumpled, the knife clattering to the floor as he fell. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed the bat from Matt and brought it down on Marcus again and again, fury taking over as I fought to protect my family. Finally, Marcus lay still, unconscious on the floor, his breath shallow. My hands were shaking, my mind reeling, but we had no time to waste. Come on, I gasped, pulling Matt toward the door. We have to go. We raced outside, Laura already loading the boys into the car, her face pale and panicked. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from the house, leaving Marcus bleeding on the floor behind us. The silence in the car was deafening. No one spoke as we drove through the empty streets, my mind racing with what had just happened. We had escaped, but for how long? Marcus wouldn't stay down forever. Laura reached over, her hand gripping mine, her eyes filled with guilt and fear. I'm sorry, Jason, she whispered. I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't respond. There were no words for what we had just been through. All I knew was that Marcus was still out there, and as long as he was, we'd never be safe. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the night pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. Laura held my hand, but her grip felt distant, like she was trying to apologize without words. I couldn't look at her. Not after what we had just been through. Not after what she had hidden from me for so long. Matt sat in the back seat, eyes darting between the kids and the road, his face pale. He had saved me back there, but the shock of what happened hadn't left either of us. Marcus wasn't just a threat anymore. He was a monster who had forced his way into our lives, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. But the moment we pulled into a rest stop on the outskirts of town to regroup, I knew something was still off. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and exhaled, trying to steady my racing heart. Max and Ethan were asleep, but the rest of us were wide awake, too on edge to relax. "We can't keep running like this," Matt said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's going to find us again. You saw how determined he is." I nodded, staring blankly at the steering wheel. "He's not going to stop. Not until he gets Lily." Laura's voice trembled as she spoke. What if we went to the police? Now that he broke into Matt's house, maybe we have enough to put him away." I shook my head. "It's not enough. The police didn't do anything before, and even if they arrest him, he'll find a way out. He's obsessed. I don't know how, but he always knows where we are." Matt was silent for a moment, then leaned forward. "Jason, there's something else. Something I need to tell you." I turned to face him, confused by the strange tone in his voice. "What is it?" Matt hesitated, glancing at Laura before he spoke. "When you and Laura first showed up at my house tonight, I got a call. It was from Marcus." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, disbelief twisting through my mind. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know how," Matt said, rubbing his temples. "I didn't think he'd follow through this fast. I thought maybe it was just another threat. He said he knew where you were going, that he'd find you no matter what. I didn't want to scare you more than you already were." I felt a surge of rage bubbling inside me. "So you knew he was coming, and you didn't warn us? You let us walk right into a trap?" "I didn't know he'd act this fast, Jason," Matt shouted back. "I thought I could handle it, okay? But he's smarter than I gave him credit for." I leaned back in the driver's seat, my mind reeling. All this time, Marcus had been one step ahead. He knew exactly where we were because someone had been telling him. And now, Matt was admitting to withholding that information. But it didn't make sense. Marcus wasn't just tracking us. He knew too much, too quickly. Then a terrible thought hit me, and I turned to Laura, my heart pounding in my chest. "Laura, is there something else you're not telling me?" Laura's eyes went wide, her face paling. "What do you mean?" "Marcus has known everything from the start," I said slowly, piecing it together in my mind. "He knew about the house, about Matt. He knew we were leaving tonight. He's been one step ahead of us the whole time. But how? He can't just magically know where we are. Someone's been feeding him information." Laura shook her head, panic flashing across her face. "Jason, no." But I wasn't listening. My mind raced through every interaction, every moment that had led to this nightmare. And the only connection between Marcus and us had been through Laura. "Tell me the truth," I demanded, my voice rising. "How is he tracking us? What have you been hiding?" Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. "You've been in contact with him, haven't you?" I said, the words coming out as a whisper, filled with betrayal. "This whole time, you've been talking to him behind my back." Laura sobbed quietly, her head dropping into her hands. "Jason, I'm so sorry. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't mean for any of this." "Then why?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. "Why didn't you cut him off? Why didn't you tell me? You could have stopped this." She wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I tried. After I told you about the affair, I blocked him, but Marcus found ways to get to me, through new numbers, fake profiles. He started threatening to hurt the kids, to hurt you if I didn't cooperate. He said if I didn't tell him where we were, he'd take Lily by force. I was terrified, Jason. I didn't know what to do." My head spun as her words sank in. She had been keeping this secret for months, out of fear, out of desperation, and in trying to protect us, she had only drawn Marcus closer. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "We're not done. I'll see you soon. Marcus. Damn it. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the rage building inside me. He's still coming for us. He's not going to stop. Laura was crying openly now, her face buried in her hands. I'm so sorry. I thought if I just kept him at bay, he'd leave us alone. But he's never going to leave us alone, Jason. He'll never stop. Matt, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide. Wait, Jason, I think I know how he's tracking you. I turned to him, confused. What are you talking about? It's your phone, Matt said, pointing at it. He's been tracking you through it. He must have hacked it or planted something on it. That's why he's always one step ahead. He's following your location. I stared down at my phone, a sickening realization hitting me. Of course, it made sense. Marcus had been using technology against us this entire time. Every text, every call, every move we made, it was all being monitored. I didn't hesitate. I opened the car door, stepped outside, and hurled my phone as far into the darkness as I could. It landed with a soft thud in the woods nearby, disappearing into the night. Now what? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she wiped her tears away. Now we disappear for real, I said, my voice cold and resolute. We find somewhere he can't track us, and we figure out how to end this. Matt nodded, his face grim. You can use my car. He doesn't know it. I'll stay behind, make sure there's no trace. Thank you, I muttered, my voice tight. But we'll have to figure this out quickly. If he's tracking us, he's already on his way. With that, we quickly transferred the kids into Matt's car and took off into the night. As I drove, the reality of the situation began to settle in. Marcus wasn't going to stop. Laura's betrayal, though born out of fear, had only fed his obsession. And now, it was a race against time before he found us again. But this time, I wasn't going to let him win. The drive through the empty highways felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Every second, every mile felt like Marcus was gaining on us, closing in. With my phone gone, I felt a temporary relief, but it wasn't enough. This wasn't over, far from it. Laura sat in the passenger seat, her eyes red from crying, while Max and Ethan slept in the back, blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding around them. I could still hear the echoes of Marcus's threats in my head, feel the weight of Laura's betrayal sitting like a stone in my chest. I wanted to scream, to yell at her for keeping all this from me, but there was no time for anger now. It had to wait. Where are we going? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know yet, I muttered. We'll keep driving until we're sure he can't follow us. But the truth was, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know how to escape Marcus anymore. Every move we made, he had been one step ahead. Every safe house had turned into a trap. And now, with nowhere else to turn, I was driving blindly, hoping we could outrun a man who had seemingly made it his life's mission to ruin ours. I pulled the car off onto a deserted road that led deep into a wooded area. It was dark, so dark that the headlights barely cut through the trees. The remoteness gave me a sense of security, but I knew it wouldn't last. We needed somewhere to hide, somewhere we could regroup and figure out our next move. After another few miles, I found a clearing and parked the car. The trees loomed tall around us, creating a dense, quiet cocoon. We were alone, at least for now. I think this is far enough, I said, turning off the engine. We'll stay here for the night. No phones, no connections, just us. Laura nodded, but the silence between us was thick with unspoken words, with guilt and fear. I knew she was sorry, but sorry didn't erase the months of lies or the danger we were in now. After a while, once the kids were settled, we sat outside the car, the cold night air biting at our skin. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I had to know the full truth. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice low, barely able to contain my frustration. From the beginning, you knew what Marcus was capable of, but you kept hiding it. Laura stared at the ground, her arms wrapped around herself as if to protect from the cold. I thought I could fix it, she whispered. I thought if I just kept him away, if I gave him just enough, he'd leave us alone. But he didn't. You should have told me, I snapped, my anger finally spilling out. I could have helped. We could have stopped him before it got this far. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. I know, Jason. I was scared. He threatened the kids. He threatened you. I didn't know what else to do. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process everything. It's not just about the threats, Laura. He knew too much. Even after you blocked him, he still knew where we were, what we were doing. It's like he was always one step ahead. She hesitated, and for a moment, I saw the same guilt flicker across her face that I'd seen before. There was more to the story, more she hadn't told me. What is it? I asked, my voice rising with urgency. What aren't you telling me? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath before finally speaking. It's not just you he's been tracking. It's me. I froze, the realization hitting me hard. What do you mean? She pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small, black device, no bigger than a coin. A tracker. He put this on me months ago, she whispered. He gave it to me when we met up for the last time, right before I confessed everything to you. I didn't realize what it was until later, and by then, it was too late. He's been using it to follow me everywhere. My heart sank. It all made sense now. The reason he always knew where we were, why we could never shake him. It wasn't just my phone. He'd been tracking Laura the whole time. Why didn't you get rid of it? I asked, feeling the rage build inside me again. Why didn't you tell me? I thought it would stop him, she said, her voice breaking. I thought if he knew where I was, if he could see that I wasn't trying to run, he wouldn't come after us. But he twisted it, Jason. He used it to control me. I grabbed the tracker from her hand, staring at it like it was some vile creature. This tiny device had been the key to Marcus's control, the reason he had been able to torment us for so long. Without thinking, I threw it as far into the woods as I could, watching it disappear into the darkness. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The weight of what we had been through, of what was still ahead, sat heavy between us. Laura had been manipulated, but I couldn't help but feel betrayed. This whole mess had spiraled out of control because of secrets, and now we were paying the price. We'll find him, I muttered, more to myself than to Laura. We'll stop him. This ends tonight. Laura looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. But how? He's always one step ahead, Jason. He's not going to stop. I stood, pacing the small clearing, my mind racing. We'll lure him here. We'll make him think he's won. And when he shows up, we'll be ready. You want to fight him? She asked, her voice shaky. Jason, he's dangerous. You saw what he did. What if he... I don't care anymore. I snapped, turning to face her. We're done running. We're done being afraid of him. Before Laura could respond, headlights appeared in the distance. A car, slowly making its way down the dirt road toward us. My heart jumped into my throat. He's here, I whispered. I grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the car. Get the kids. Stay inside. Don't come out, no matter what happens. Laura hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but she nodded, rushing to the back seat to check on Max and Ethan. I grabbed the tire iron from the trunk, my hands shaking as I positioned myself near the edge of the clearing. The car stopped about 50 feet away, its headlights glaring through the trees. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the driver's door opened. Marcus stepped out, his figure looming in the darkness, calm and collected as if he had all the time in the world. He took a few slow steps forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Jason, he said, his voice cool and steady. I told you this wasn't over. My grip tightened on the tire iron, my blood boiling. It's over tonight, Marcus. He smiled, stepping closer. You're not going to win this. You know that, right? You're fighting for something that doesn't belong to you. Stay away from my family. I shouted, the tire iron shaking in my hands. But Marcus didn't stop. He kept walking, his eyes gleaming with confidence. You're too late, Jason. You've always been too late. I lunged forward, swinging the tire iron with everything I had. Marcus dodged easily, grabbing my arm and twisting it with terrifying strength. I dropped the weapon, pain shooting through my wrist. He shoved me back, and I stumbled, falling to the ground. You can't stop me, Jason, he said, his voice low and menacing. She's mine. I struggled to my feet, refusing to give in. No, she's not. And you're not walking away from this. Before Marcus could respond, a loud crack echoed through the clearing. Marcus staggered, his hand flying to his chest. Blood poured through his fingers. I turned and saw Laura standing behind me, holding Matt's old hunting rifle, her hands shaking but her eyes steady. Marcus collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as blood pooled around him. He looked up at me, his expression filled with shock. "This isn't how it ends," he rasped, but his voice was fading. I stood over him, watching the life drain from his eyes. "It is for you." The clearing was still, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and the metallic tang of blood. Marcus lay motionless on the ground, his final words fading into the night. The tension that had consumed every inch of my body slowly ebbed away, replaced by a numbness I couldn't shake. Laura lowered the rifle, her hands trembling as the reality of what she'd done began to settle in. She'd saved us, but the cost weighed heavily on both of us. I walked over to her, gently taking the gun from her hands and setting it on the ground. "It's over," I whispered, more to reassure myself than her. Laura's eyes were wide, her face pale, and she nodded, but I could see the shock in her gaze. She had never been the type to resort to violence, yet here she was, having killed the man who had been terrorizing us for months. It felt like an end, but at the same time, I knew it wasn't over. Not completely. We had to face the consequences of what had just happened. I knelt beside Marcus's body, checking for a pulse. There was none. His eyes were still open, staring lifelessly into the night sky. I stood up and turned toward Laura. "We need to call the police," I said quietly. "They'll understand, right?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was self-defense. He was going to kill you." I nodded, though the weight of what was coming next pressed down on me. "They'll understand. But we still need to tell them everything." I pulled out Matt's phone, my only link now to the outside world, and dialed 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, giving them our location and explaining what had happened, Laura stayed by the car, checking on the boys. Max and Ethan were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the horror that had just unfolded. I was grateful for that small mercy. Within an hour, the flashing lights of police cars lit up the forest, and officers swarmed the clearing. They asked questions, took statements, and examined Marcus's body. I felt detached from it all, as if I were watching from a distance, numb to the chaos around me. Laura was questioned separately, recounting the events with a shaky voice, but the truth was undeniable. We had been terrorized, hunted, and pushed to the edge. She had acted to save our family, and it was clear to everyone. After several hours, the lead detective, a grizzled man named Detective Harris, approached me. His face was serious, but not unkind. "We're going to need you both to come down to the station tomorrow to finalize your statements," he said. "But for now, you're free to go." From what we've gathered, it was self-defense. Marcus had a history of violent behavior and stalking, and this matches his pattern. I nodded, though I could hardly process the relief I should have felt. "Thank you," I muttered. Harris gave me a small nod. "It's over now. You can go home, get some rest." But as we drove away from the scene, exhaustion settling into every fiber of my being, I realized that going home wasn't so simple. Marcus was gone, but his presence lingered, like a shadow hanging over us. We had survived, but there were scars, both physical and emotional, that wouldn't heal overnight. A week later, the days following Marcus's death passed in a haze of police reports, phone calls, and conversations with lawyers. The case had been ruled self-defense, and Laura wasn't charged with anything. The legal system had cleared us, but the emotional aftermath still lingered. I hadn't spoken to Matt much since that night. He had his own guilt to process, though he had helped save us in the end. We stayed at a motel for a few nights, avoiding the house that had become a battleground. But eventually, life had to resume. The kids needed routine, and we needed to face the wreckage of what Marcus had left behind. Returning home felt surreal. The broken window had been repaired, the rooms tidied up, but the memories of that night still clung to the walls. As we stepped inside, Laura hesitated at the door, holding Lily close. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that plagued her. "We'll get through this," I said, though the words felt hollow. I wasn't sure I believed them myself. Laura nodded, but didn't say anything. She went upstairs to put the boys to bed while I wandered through the house, my thoughts a tangled mess. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unfinished, that there was one last piece of the puzzle I hadn't uncovered. I went into Laura's office, the room where I had first found her journal and learned about Marcus. The drawer where she had hidden the journal was now empty, but something in me couldn't let it go. I started searching, my fingers brushing over papers, folders, anything that might give me clarity. And then, at the bottom of a box filled with old receipts and notes, I found something I hadn't seen before, a letter. The envelope was tattered, as if it had been handled too many times. My name was written on the front, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I opened it, my hands shaking, and read the contents in silence. The letter was from Marcus. "Jason, if you're reading this, then I've failed. I never wanted it to come to this, but you left me no choice. You were always in the way, standing between me and what I deserved. Laura was never yours. She was mine before you even knew her. You think this all started with an affair, but it didn't. It started years ago. She loved me once, and she would have come back to me if you hadn't trapped her. I was supposed to have her. Lily was supposed to be mine. You ruined that. But even in death, I win. You'll never trust her again. You'll never look at her the same. I've taken that from you. I've planted the seed of doubt, and it'll grow until it consumes you both. You may have killed me, but I've destroyed you. Good luck living with that." I stared at the letter, my stomach twisting in knots. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. Laura had made mistakes, but she wasn't his. She hadn't been manipulated the way Marcus claimed. She hadn't loved him the way he believed. Had she? I crumpled the letter in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to believe his final words. I didn't want to believe that Marcus had won, even in death. But the doubt had already taken root. A year had passed since that night in the clearing, since Marcus's death. The police had long closed the case, and life had settled into a new kind of normal. But Marcus's final message haunted me, lingering in the quiet moments, in the glances Laura and I shared but didn't speak of. Our marriage had survived, but it wasn't the same. The trust that had been shattered wasn't easy to rebuild, and while we had tried, there was always something, some unspoken question between us. Did Laura love him once? Was I just the obstacle in their way, as Marcus had claimed? I didn't know. I might never know. But I couldn't let Marcus's words destroy us, not after everything we had survived. So I kept the letter locked away, buried with the other remnants of that nightmare. And every day, I chose to believe that we could move forward. That, despite Marcus's final threat, we could heal. But there were still moments when I wondered if Marcus was right. If, even in death, he had found a way to take something from me that I would never get back. Bye-bye.